This is a story. I'm going to tell you a story, consistent with my background as a storyteller, trained storyteller from our ancestors in Guatemala, our elders. And it is a story that defines me, but also defines a lot of people now that I work with, defines my origins, and my origins defined the story and myself. And so as we go through that story, we have to remember that that story is simply the foundation on the story that we are here to start writing today. This is it's a continuum. There's multiple stories across all of this trajectory of regenerative thinking. In our ancestral way of understanding that, it's centered on a way of thinking, on a way of being, of relating, of knowing, of learning, and of working. And so regeneration for us is really not, in the context of agriculture, is not about agricultural practices. But it puts us in this place of continuously transforming. And you will see throughout today how that transformational concept is central to everything we do. But we are beyond transformation now. We're also into this transcendence. We are in a space now where we have to transcend from these old ways of thinking, of being, of relating, of knowing, into a new space where we may do better as human beings as a result of taking care of all of the other living things and living systems on the planet. I think we are at that point now. And unless we embrace that seriously, I don't think we're going to have a planet to live on. And so we are at that threshold. It may sound like a cliche now because too many corporations are adapting this language and turning it into narrative and marketing. For us, it's real, it's serious. And for my kids, especially the younger ones, it's even more serious. The level at which these ways that we have adopted and dominate today is now resulting in mass-scale epidemics of mental illness and health-related diseases. Is so massive now that it is time we stop ignoring it and we start looking at it. So there is not only a transformation, but this transcendence that goes deep into us at the spiritual level so that we can then re-understand what does it mean to be alive to begin with, and what does it mean to live versus, being alive versus living, two very different things. So with that in mind, let me tell you this story of the chickens and the trees. I will write a children's book, by the way. I got the short stories already. But the chickens in the trees for us come from this space of what we call indigenization of the mind. Indigenization of the mind simply means being able to go deep into your subconscious, which defines almost everything we do, by the way. I'd say 98% of what we do is defined by the subconscious. And in that subconscious, we have this stored ancestral information. Normally, we don't tap it because we are so busy and so distracted by everything that we forget about the greatest wealth of intellect, which is the indigenous intellect. We are born with it. Scientists call it innate intelligence, and it is available to every single human being on the planet and every other living organism. We're all born that way. And so digging into that inner capacity allows us to see what I think as the other 95%. This linear way we are trained to live allows us to see about 5% of the possibilities. The indigenization of the mind, as we go through that process, allows us to see that other 95%. And that 95% is what we're trying to tap, starting with understanding the world from the perspective of those we are relating to. Remember what I said about regeneration. It's a way of being, knowing, relating, understanding, working. And so as we think of that relationship to those other living systems on the planet, and we are as working with them as part of a food system, which is what we are here for, we have to first understand the world from their perspective. Now the chicken is a jungle fowl. You don't have to go very far, but about 17,000 years ago, the chicken came into our lives and started to get domesticated, but it never lost its origins from the southeast jungles, the jungles of Southeast Asia. And from there, you can get a really clear blueprint of how the chicken sees the world, right? So everything from the psychological aspects, what affects them, what stresses them, what relaxes them, what affects their immunological resistance to diseases, what makes them sick, all of it, even how they choose food, because all of us living organisms have this ability to understand when we are eating nutritious food. We have lost a lot of it as humans because we are too bombarded with all kinds of fake stuff, like things that mask the real nature of food, like salt and fats. Animals have that instinct really, really developed and preserved. And so even with all these 17,000+ years of domestication, you put a chicken out there and it will go straight for very specific geoevolutionary traits, as we call them. So I'll throw a few words here and there to show you that we have gone deep into understanding not only how we can indigenize the process of and build the indigenous intellect so that we can grab that 95% that we normally miss as we engineer and develop this science and technology, but also understanding that we are doing this for the purpose of, in this case, transforming an industry sector, the poultry sector. So it's all of it encapsulated into a system level of planning. So I'll leave it there, although there is very specific reason we picked the chicken, and call that. As we go forward, you will see why we did that. So in this concept we're talking about, one of the things we removed from our colonizing structure and training was the idea that as farmers, we are producers of anything. We simply, when you look at it from the indigenous perspective, what we understand ourselves as is simply stewards of a process of energy transformation that has been going on for billions of years, and is the reason that the diversity of life on the planet is so magnificent. It's given to those evolutionary processes by which energy has been recodified into multiple expressions of energy, which is all the living things on the planet. But it started, as you know, as a molten rock going around the sun, and eventually cooled off enough, and then those toxic elements and radioactive elements got bundled up, packed, and put deep into the ground so they wouldn't bother life. And then here comes us and start digging them back up, right? So just a point to think about. But it's energy at the end of the day. Now, in the food system, we have to understand that energy and its transformation process is really what we are engaged in. So from that scientific perspective and managerial perspective, to the extent that we focus on stewarding the processes of energy transformation, we'll be better off at the end of the day. The animals or the plants or whatever it is that we are stewarding are going to be healthier, more nutrient dense, and all of these things that we keep talking about in our industry. Now, that energy transformation happens primarily in three places. The photosynthetic infrastructure of the planet. Every leaf on the planet and algae and trunks of trees and even animals that photosynthesize are part of that photosynthetic infrastructure. It takes sunlight, minerals, and water and turns into this incredibly complex, never-ending chain of molecules that we call, to start with glucose, which is called the molecule of life, which then generates all of these other sugars, from sucrose to saccharose and so on and so forth, right? To hundreds and hundreds of different expressions of photosynthetic outputs. The second level is those outputs are some of them harvestable, like corn, if you're gonna eat the corn directly on the cob, apples, nuts. That output is directly harvestable as food, right? So it doesn't have to go through any other processing. But most of it, 90+% of it, is in a form that we just can't harvest and eat, us, right? But there is all these other living systems that can do that. And this is where animals are so central to the next stage of energy transformation. So if you take say a bale of hay and you put it in a compost pile, it will be about a year before you see soil. You take that hay and feed it to a cow, 3, 4, 5 days later, it became manure and pea, and beef, and meat and everything, or chickens or eggs or whatever it is. And then a few days later, that manure and that pea can then go into the soil, and through the biology of the soil, the third level of large-scale energy transformation gets turned into nutrients and minerals again so that it goes back up and becomes photosynthesis again, and it feeds. Those systems feed continuously, and they have been doing this to the point of perfection, because the Earth's own 60 plus billion years geoevolutionary processes perfected those processes. Here we come again and start messing with them in the name of improvement or more efficiency. What we have done is interfere with those processes. So this is critical to understand, because our company is really not in the business of selling chickens. That's one of the things we do so that we can complete cycles of energy transformation, and so we can deliver that energy to all of those out there who want the best chicken on this planet. But it is not about the chicken. It's about ensuring that we can do this for the next 7 generations. And that requires that we understand the ancestral foundational principles of what delivers regenerative outcomes. So that's just in a nutshell the science behind what we do, the biophysics and the chemistry, as well as the full use of the laws of thermodynamics that establish that energy cannot be produced nor destroyed. It can only be transformed according to the 2 fundamental laws. So how do we do that in real life? Well, we have codified all of that traditional ecological knowledge, as it's called now, TEQ, into modern systems designs. What does it mean? So taking the chicken as the centerpiece. So remember, 3 pivots of energy transformation. Now, livestock in general can be one of those pivots. It can be cows, it can be pigs, goats, whatever. The thing for us was that poultry gave us the key, literally, to the world of protein. Chickens are considered the protein of the poor, because every family on this planet, even here in the Twin Cities with six chickens that the city allows you in the backyard, you can't have chickens. Now, you can't have a cow. I mean, you could have a cow there, but the city is going to kick you out. But, or God forbids goats. They will crawl up the wall of the house, and they will eat the roof and then jump to the next house. So chickens for us is like this docile, simple, gracious, beautiful livestock that is also compatible with every single one of the 700 plus million farmers who, even though operating under 25 acres of land, produce 70% of the food that is actually showing up on our tables today. So rethink that whole idea that we need corporations to feed the world, the big corporations. Actually, if you look at what the outputs of the large-scale agro-industrial systems is, it isn't food. In fact, in the US, 40% of the Midwest is turned into corn and soybeans every year. And a large percentage, over 50% of that, goes into producing fuels, not food. Ethanol specifically, and the stuff that shows up in your gas pump. So yeah, let's think about that, because what happens is this livestock, not only magnificent, not only beautiful, but also the key to a potentially transformative and transcendent strategy for us, not only as entrepreneurs and executives of companies, but also for consumers who want to stop killing the planet in the name of food. So if you put the chicken in that space, and then you connect it to that equation that was the energy equation of life, as I said, you put the chicken as a jungle fowl goes under the trees, and then below the chicken is the biology of the soil. We tested this system thoroughly over the last 10 years. And have found some of the most amazing soil health results down to a depth of 3 feet in depth, so 60 inches, 75 inches in depth, to the point that we dug up literally wormholes, where we saw them on the surface, and then we dug this hole all the way down to 60 inches before we couldn't visibly see the cavities. What that does is it restores this mass scale hydrology of the soil. It just does these wonderful things for the landscape, cleans the water, filters, restores carbon to the ground, to the soil. It just regenerates, period, right? So you take those 3 points, we have accomplished the fundamentals of the science behind the system, and then you start harvesting energy, right? Meat from the chickens, eggs, hazelnuts and elderberries, which we use as an understory, and eventually timber from the overstory, and nuts from the overstory, all the way from oaks to to acorns to other nuts that we can harvest. Some of the energy coming out of the barns, like the barn we cleaned up this morning after the last flock went to the processor last night, That barn was cleaned up today. That manure goes into the larger fields where we are growing vegetables, grains. We have a large plantation of garlic that is all connected to the original entry point of that energy, and then we can circulate all the way until that energy is going to show up in the plate in the form of carrots and beets and other things or the vegetables and so on. So here's to say that if you're a vegetarian, that's all good. It's just a way to use that energy from the planet to nourish our spirit, our minds, and our bodies. But remember that without the animals, we can't have our vegetables. It is simply a biophysical equation. Such a thing doesn't exist. I'm not saying that we need to eat the chickens. If we're not going to eat it, of course, we got to figure out different strategies to have them in the land and keep them until they die of natural age. But we can't have the rest of the cycles. The system stalls the second we remove animals, because the photosynthetic and the soil alone cannot complete the process. So this is critical for us to understand as we look into why are we then calling this regenerative poultry production, right? Because it does all of those things that I just described, and it's centered on this solid, time-tested, fireproof technology that the earth delivered to us in a way that we cannot improve upon, we can only take advantage of. So the chickens come in just the same way as any barn. They sit around in this space that is protected from drafts, there's heat, there is drinking fountains, there is feed trays and so on. 4 weeks after they arrive, they are big enough that they can start ranging. And so while they are indoors, we are preparing the outdoors. Remember, it's tree range, right? It's tree range because the whole idea is to put the chickens to literally welcome to the jungle kind of situation. Maybe that's a theme song for our next piece. So anyway, so this forage at the ground level, I forgot how sensitive this screen is. So we basically manage the ground level for that energy to be transformed from the poultry manure that was deposited there before into new growth that then the chickens can forage on. And then the trees above will take some of that energy, turn them into nuts. The other trees above will turn that into timber and other kinds of energy expressions. At the end, we'll be harvesting the chickens from the bottom here, from the intermediate layer. We basically don't see the land, say an acre to us, it is not 43,560 square feet, as it says in the real estate map of your land. To us, really, it starts at, in this case, 12 feet underground, which is the depth of the roots of the hazelnuts, and it goes up to 36 above ground, with an average of probably 2,500 to 3,000 cubic feet of energy transformation infrastructure that we can install there. That is the other 95% I'm talking about. If you don't see the world that way, you simply can never tap into this incredible source of energy transformation infrastructure that was literally handed to us, and we have turned into corn and soybean fields. Now, once you do that, then we can start talking about how do we build a company and the foundation of a new supply chain. And so we codified the production unit, which is this simple little piece, which allows us to codify, okay, how many chickens can we put in there? How much space do they need? What are the paddock sizes? How many square feet per chicken? How are they gonna rotate back and forth so we can manage the regeneration of one paddock while the other one is being used, that kind of thing. Once we had that figured out, which came down to 1.5 acres per production unit, 1 square foot per chicken for the buildings, and a total of 1,500 chickens per flock. And in this, God forbidding climate, where we get just a day of warm weather, we can put 3 flocks in a year, and then we have to shut everything down because we just can't put chickens out there right now, right? So that's simple, a production unit. Now you take that and aggregate it, and we can create what we call an enterprise design, which is a number of production units on a farm that, according to our own planning, gives us sufficient income to make a living off of that space, right? In general, we're thinking 8 to 10 production units delivers a farm enterprise, which from where a family like ours can make a decent living. Once we do that, in a farm like this, which is Will's farm, by the way, originally we called it Regeneration Farms, is the organic compound. In this case, 42 acres were transformed into, Juice Fingers is back, yes. He was doing this to me before. That's what happens when you put a smart screen in front of us. So anyway, bottom line is you can take this production unit, aggregate it to build a farm enterprise level design, and then take advantage of a larger landscape within that design, because it allows the energy from all these barns, for example, to flow into the spaces where there is no chickens. Now, we're still putting alleys here with bands of elderberries, hazelnuts, and forest species as well, so that we can protect the soil, break the wind, protect with the snow, keep runoff from happening, keep, cover the soil, and so on. So the key is that now this larger landscape becomes part of that energy management infrastructure. Now, if a farmer only has this space and doesn't have extra space, then what we do is we pair them with a farmer who doesn't want to grow chickens, but wants to grow grain and can use all the manure as energy source for the inputs for their farm. The key is to stop thinking about the farm as the end purpose and start thinking of the region as the end purpose, which gives us the foundation of what we call regeneration, right? Why? Because a farm is not regenerative on its own. Regeneration only happens at the ecosystem level. So unless we actually are managing ecosystems, we don't have regenerative chicken. And so this is why codifying the farm was critical, so that then we can take that farm now and codify it into a region, so that we can aggregate now the farms to create an ecosystem level impact and consequently regenerative outcomes. So really important to understand the mechanics of this, because then when you go back to look at how the chicken roams and does all of these things as a farmer, I want to know I'm making a difference, right? And this, even though I'm just focused on this production unit at a certain point, I know this is aggregated to create a regional impact and a systems change outcome. If you're a consumer, you will think, well, if I eat one of these chickens, I'm actually part of a whole different system, not just part of another company that is coming and whitewashing this ancestral knowledge and selling it as something that is not. And so on. All of that aggregation, not only that chain reaction in our minds, but also the chain reaction in the supply chain, which we are responsible for. Basically, as the trees grow, we have also incorporated many varieties. So these are spruce trees, these are elderberries. We tested over 13 different breeds. I think I planted 15 different species of trees between nuts and fruits. And then we selected those that thrived as a result, rather than trying to impose what we wanted. We just observed that. Remember, regenerative systems are about how we learn. So a way of learning, a way of relating, a way of knowing, and so on. And this is where our basic knowledge has come from, until we were able to see that the hazelnuts, where there were chickens, for example, are outproducing the hazelnuts where there is no chickens by almost a factor of 2. Which is simply, the hazelnut, from an indigenous perspective, is simply saying, thank you. Now I can relax my system. I can stop fighting for nutrients and water and other things, and I can focus on being the best I can as a species and express myself in the best way I can. That's what the hazelnut is doing. And so as a result, it's now producing a lot more nuts, because it doesn't have to worry about nutrients for the next cycle, which is the reason a lot of the perennial crops produce this way. Because one year they produce too much because they got nutrients, and then they do their math in there. It's like these little cells that are like adding up. It's like, oh, dang, we don't have enough nutrition for next year. Okay, cut off all the reproductive systems, and bam, they shut down to a very minimum. And then until the next season, when the nutrients accumulate again, they produce again. Well, these hazelnuts don't have to do that. Every year, they are increasing the production even, because they can do the math. And this is the thing that we hardly ever care to learn about. But it's not just about the hazelnut now. It's also about the chicken. So the chicken needs protection. The hazelnut needs nitrogen. The hazelnut needs about 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre in order to get enough nutrients to produce a crop of that size. The chicken excretes over 40% of the total feed going in, which is at least 22% protein at the beginning and 18% protein towards the end, and excretes almost 40% of that in the form of mostly nitrogen, which is what the hazelnut needs. Now, this is not coincidental. These two have been concocting this plant for millions of years, and they are part of an evolutionary symbiotic process. Now, when we go linear about these engineering processes, we miss that 95%. And so the hazelnuts won't do as well, and our chickens won't do as well. This is why tree range is the only way chicken is going to be the regenerative opportunity and the regenerative option for farmers, companies, and consumers. Unless we do that, we are really not delivering what we are expected to this day in the conditions we are. And that is our responsibility. That's what we are. If you think of us as a socially responsible company, as a ecologically responsible company, all of those things, we exceed every single check mark. Because the goal was not to meet the check marks, the goal was to actually deliver regeneration. And as we do that, then we can benefit from the actual results. Now this, remember I said 4 weeks after they come in, they start ranging. Now this is like their second day, because they're starting to actually go out in the morning. So 4 weeks in, they're big enough, they can start learning what it looks like to actually be a chicken under the trees. So again, no cages, no confinement, except at night to protect them from predators and stuff, but only to sleep on, not to live on. There's no feed or water indoors, it's always outside, so that they don't have a reason to be inside. Now take that, move it 70 days later, and you still have the most agile, strong, super chickens, so to speak. And I can guarantee you, those are the same chickens that went in front at the very beginning. They got this order, they don't mess with it. This is not just a handful of chickens. We're talking about 1,500 chickens that are actually doing this every day on our farms. Now, if you're a chicken, when I'm born again, I honestly want to be a chicken in that system. I never thought I was going to say that. I thought it was like, well, I want to be a cougar, or something like that. I changed my mind. Well, and then there comes the byproducts, hazelnuts. It's one important. Biomass at a significant scale now, especially if we start trimming the forest system. A diversity of vegetables. This plot is now 10 years old, and we applied the poultry manure layered with wood chips and other organic matter 10 years ago, and we're still growing top quality vegetables with not a single input of carbon or the energy ever since. That's how magnificent the actual energy flows are in a system like this. So again, if we are vegetarians, it's all cool. I don't mind that, and I want more people to be vegetarians because actually the production, the output of the system instead of energy, in terms of energy, is so much greater than the chicken. The chicken is actually not the greatest output of energy from our system. It's nuts and vegetables and fruits. So from a larger perspective, that wouldn't be bad as long as you still buy the chickens, because without the chickens, we're not going to have a business. And if without a business, we're not going to have the vegetables, not the way we need to have them anyway, not in a regenerative way. So again, it's a diversity. Everything you can think of, corn, especially Lilia's family, like onions, leeks, and garlic, they have the nutritional profile is almost identical to the nutritional profile of the poultry manure. Poultry manure, different from other manure, has all 13 of the core elements that plants need to grow healthy and to accumulate the right amounts of energy, phytonutrients, and all of those things that we need. And so it literally is as close to a silver chicken as it gets. You were supposed to laugh at that. Now, in my case, I brought in black beans because that's one of my ethnic foods. And we have never put anything else but wood chips and poultry manure into this. To And because I'm a geek for all of this stuff, I actually count beans every year, right? So I take these plants. This last year we harvested 305 of these selected plants. We cut them up. Well, Ivy, the volunteer, did most of it. But anyway, and then we literally counted each pod per tree, and we got all of this data in, which I then compared to the University of Nicaragua, which has the top quality black beans in Latin America. And we exceeded their expectations of productivity by 25% in Minnesota, where black beans were not supposed to grow. These black beans started with, I plant them as early as I could, and I would harvest them all the way till the end of the season, because the season wasn't long enough. And we have been able to shave 60 days out of their photo period, so that we now can plant them as, once it gets warm in June, and harvest them by the end of September. And all of that is because they already have the code. They already know what to do. All we have to do is use the other 95% of our intellect. Pollinator habitats is central to our system. And as we do all of that, you can now get a picture of the landscape now delivering us these abundant expressions of energy from multiple sources, which gives us the code for how we build the ecosystem of businesses to manage that. So we started mapping out what would it look like once we have transformed the southeastern Minnesota region and other regions in the country. And so with the chicken and the eggs in the center, don't ask me which one goes first, please. So with the chicken in the end and the egg in the middle, we can then engage processing both eggs and meat, feed processing, because as we do this, we learn that there is a lot of meat-eating native species of fish here, which can allow us to take the energy from the processing facility, package it. And I did the test for this. We just froze them in cubes, and then we threw them into stock tanks where we had the fish, and then they will eat it from below as it defrosted in the summer. And what it does is, instead of having those stinking, compost facilities, we can just take that energy, instead of sitting there for months and releasing nitrogen and ammonia and other contaminants, we can put it directly back into another species, which, by the way, the manure from the chicken blood and manure mixed into those byproducts has a high level of salmonella and listeria, which is two deadly bacteria that are not allowed in the system but cannot survive in the water. And so the fish actually literally creates a biological barrier and transforms that energy back into another edible, super healthy white meat that we can harvest. And their poop dissolved in the water, which is mostly ammonia, then can be used as fertigation, as we say, fertilization and irrigation together. All we need to do is filter out some of the basic particles, and it can go into a regular spreader in the field or a sprinkling system. All of this can be codified. And as we do that, we figure we've got all of these enterprise sectors that we can engage to create an actual system of enterprises. And then Tree Range here in the front takes the marketing, branding, distribution of all of those system outputs. That's what Tree Range is about. Starting with the chicken, yes, the chicken, not the egg, please. And moving it into this space where we can now build a regional strategy that allows us to aggregate enterprise sectors so that we can redesign the landscape while launching one of the leading companies in the country that actually represents everything we understand as regenerative. Now, it's not just about that either, because we got to speed up the transition process. So what if you have 100, 200 acres? What do you do, right? How do you start? And how does that spell out? Well, here's my farm, 86 acres, from which I sold 8 acres on that side and 13 acres on the other end so that I could pay the mortgage. So I could end up with 67 acres and very little mortgage. That's another way to access land, by the way. So here it is, 67 acres. It was all corn and soybeans, plus 26.5 acres of woods. This is the parcel I sold out. And this is the other part. I sold it out to the apple orchard. And that I was able to section out, sell for a higher price, because it's not for farming, it's for residential, right? So all of this space then, we look at the water systems, the flows, and all of that, so that we could design the next stage of development, which basically started by just sinking in roots and putting photosynthetic infrastructure so that we could capture the largest potential amount of carbon and put it into the ground. That's all we care for in 2021 after we bought the farm. The key was, let's start feeding up that biology, because without that biology, we're nobodies in this space, right? The next thing was to ensure that we started breaking some of the tile that is used across the Midwest in trillions of linear feet of tile, draining all of the fresh water, putting it into ditches, and then going down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico's dead zone. So breaking those tiles and creating reservoirs so that water, we're using what we call the beaver method engineering process. You know, slow it, spread it, sink it. And then we can restart refilling the underwater reservoirs. We are sitting on the largest underground reservoir in the world, the Oglala. And we are literally drying it out below ground. And where are we going to get our water? We are just tiling it straight down the river. It doesn't work because now the sea level goes up, the salt water starts getting diluted, all of that, when we actually need the water here on the farms. And then here comes the hazelnuts. So literally, we are able to say to the farmer, this is what you do, step by step, this is how much it's gonna cost, this is the crews you're gonna need, and so on. So there's infrastructure of all kinds, road, electrical, well, plant perennial crops, water retention, all of that, so that we can get through the first stage. This is what it looked like in the middle of the summer in 2021, when our goal was just sink in as much carbon as we could, because this was after conventional crops. We just mowed it and kept it on the ground so that we could just feed that biology, right? So again, you know, bare land turned into a carbon oasis. Eventually, this is the idea. The whole farm will look like this, and in between all of that, they will be the happiest chickens you could ever encounter. Under the trees, of course. And so, what are we going to do now? Well, we are here because we want to launch what we want it to be, the leading regenerative poultry company in this country, and we want to excite everyone to transform at least 5% of the 31 billion poultry industry and transform it into a replicable, regenerative poultry system that is good for us, for the animals, and for the planet. And this is the code by which we do that at any scale this country and the world is willing to support. That is the key. There is no scalability limit, which has been the basic bottleneck of a lot of the systems and the ideas out there, is that they are not scalable. We designed for scale from the very beginning. So, but more than that, in the next 5 years, we want to see this region deployed. Now, we have two fundamental partners, the city of Alberta and a processing facility that we bought in Stacyville, where all of our current chicken is processed. We already have that infrastructure. We got 11 farms producing chickens already and 15 farms producing grains. This coming year, we'll probably double that, and our goal is by the end of 23 to have at least 50 farms engaged, even though not all producing, but at least engaged and in the process of moving into the system. So in the next 5 years, we'll engage those 50 farms, poultry farms, and at least 25 grain producers. We will build a 500,000 broiler a year operation, which is the next stage of the processing facility with minor modifications to the current infrastructure. We will build this into a national brand. We will support the launch of a Midwest hazelnut industry, because we got now the calculations for planting 1 million trees, so that we can then also build enough throughput to launch a Midwest hazelnut supply chain and industry sector. And then support the launch of the first regional regenerative poultry producer pool, which is that tri-state region that we are talking about. And by the way, we already got all of the ground-based infrastructure for that, and the institution that will coordinate all of that backbone, which is led by Diane Beck, who's in the room, who's now the executive director of the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. I founded it in 2018 so that we could then build the backbone infrastructure so that the system, so we could de-risk the launch of the company And so as you, investors and customers come into this space, you are guaranteed that we have already done all of the ground-based work so that you can confidently walk into this space, buy the chicken, serve the chicken, or put your capital into the future of agriculture and poultry. So that's our next 5 years. And so the key is, as we go forward, like I said at the beginning, we are writing this story to define our future and that of the next generation, 7 generations. This is our story. I am just giving you the outline of how we can actually write the book, but the book is still to be written. And we get to do that. Remember, people built what we have today. They thought about it, they expressed it, and they went and engineered and built it. And in the same way, I have expressed the collective thought process. I expressed that collective thought process, and now I'm inviting you to put your hands on it and help us build this company just the same way every company and every system has been built in this country, except now we will regenerate, we will transcend all of those limitations that we have imposed on ourselves through the kind of training that we get today. So, thank you. Miigwech, gracias, mal Joshua Chaweha.